Welcome and thank you for tuning into this video. I'm Sarah Peterson.
I'm Shaye Cohn.
And we're going to play some classic blues of the 1920s with selections from the recordings of Bessie Smith and Clara Smith, and talk a little bit about these two artists and some about the song choices and musicians that accompany them. To give you some background, the impetus for this project came to me through the past 10 months of the current pandemic and all the life changes that it continues to bring. And it very much derived from the severity of injustice and deep systemic racism that has risen into public consciousness in that same period of time. I felt the need to dig into and to share the information I find about the amazing musicianship, the personalities, the songs and stylings, the content and the constructs of this musical era that we both play, and the importance of giving context to the music as well as honoring those African Americans who originated it. Again, I'm Sarah Peterson, and I've been playing traditional jazz and blues and early 20th century popular music for over a decade now, with mainly as the singer for the group Smoking Time Jazz Club. I've felt called to the music through its tones and textures, and I'm very fortunate to be able to make my living playing it here in New Orleans. I invited my dear friend Shaye Cohn to join me in this project, as she is one of my favorite musicians to listen to and to collaborate with. Shaye, too, has been playing traditional jazz and blues, writing originals in the vein, playing country blues and rags and early R&B, mainly as the cornetist for the group Tuba Skinny. She's plays with many other musicians as well, both on piano and on horn. And although Tuba Skinny is based here in New Orleans, they do travel all over the country and the world to perform and share their music. And so I felt compelled to open up more of a historical context to our listeners, but even more than that, I feel it imperative to do so for myself as well as for you all. This music was born out of slavery and Jim Crow. It's inextricably linked to these harsh histories and constructs. And this music is born from the creativity, ingenuity, and hard work of others' life experiences. It's important for us to speak their names and to take some time to learn about the how and why these songs came to be. As a performer, I've always sought to pay homage as well as find my own voice in the medium. And so we've decided to do a piece together focusing on a couple of the most popular blues singers of the 1920s, Bessie Smith, the Empress of the Blues, and Clara Smith, the Queen of the Moaners. We'll play two songs from each of their bodies of work, and we'll talk a little bit about their legacies, and we'll play a song that they recorded in duet. And then we'll also talk some about the songs and the accompaniment. Thank you again for joining us. And without further ado, we're going to start with Bessie Smith and her Bleeding Hearted Blues. This tune was written by Lovey Austin, and it was recorded in June of 1923 with Fletcher Henderson on piano.
Sad and lonely, thinking about him only, feeling disgusted and blue. How your heart is aching, yes, it's almost breaking. No one to tell your sorrows to. That's the time you hang your head and begin to cry. When the world forsakes you, troubles overtake you, and your good man put you down. People talk about you, everybody doubt you, and your friends, they can't be found. Not a soul to ease your pain. You bleed in vain. You got those bleeding hearted blues. Yeah, baby, tell me what is on your mind. Pretty papa, tell me what's on I give up every friend that I had. Yes, I give up every friend that I had. I give up my mother, even give up dear old dad.
Okay, so now we're going to introduce you a bit to Bessie Smith. She was born in Chattanooga, Tennessee in 1894, and her father, William, who was a part-time minister of the gospel, died too early for her to remember. Her mother, Laura, and one of her brothers died when she was only 9. She was raised by her sister, Viola, and she and her siblings took care of each other. She started to sing and perform on the streets as a child and busked with her brother, Andrew. In 1904, her eldest brother, Clarence, joined the Moses Stokes Traveling Troupe. It was common for young black performers to join a troupe and travel on the Southern Circuit, doing vaudeville acts and tent shows. And in 1912, she joined the same troupe as a dancer. This is where she met the mother of the blues, Gertrude Ma Rainey. The two forged a very important bond. And by 1913, she had her own act at Atlanta's 81 Theater. She traveled and performed around the South and Chicago and New York, and in 1923, she signed with Columbia Records. Columbia had just established their race record series as record companies began to see how profitable that the women blues singers of the 1920s and gearing towards a black audience in general could be after the success of the Crazy Blues, which was recorded by Mamie Smith and her Jazz Hounds in 1920. Bessie's first issue was called The Cemetery Blues. She began headlining on the theater owner booking agency circuit, or TOBA, and she worked hard and often, doing theater all winter, touring and tent shows all year. She recorded dozens of sides for the record companies and recorded 160 tunes for Columbia in the 1920s. She became the highest paid black entertainer of her day, and she was coined the Empress. Even still, she was rejected from such labels as the black-run Black Swan Records for having what they considered too rough a sound. She had a reputation for being straightforward and brash and real all around, as she was generous and kind, and she was known for her command over the audience and how her voice carried loud and strong and very emotionally. She could sing the slowest of blueses and keep you on the edge of your seat. She is, of course, an icon of the 20th century and one of the most influential singers of her day and through this day. Her personal life was full of drinking and full of loving. She had a husband named Jack G., and although they never divorced, they were split long before she died. She had a common-law husband named Richard Morgan, who was Lionel Hampton's uncle, and who she was with him until her untimely death. She had lovers, both male and female, and this was not uncommon. There are many references to the different types of relationships which she was familiar in her repertoire. At the end of her career, she was recording into the next era of jazz with larger bands and popular songs out of the blues form. She also broke into cinema and Broadway, but she died after a car crash in Clarksdale, Mississippi, while on tour in 1937 at the age of 42. She died of blood loss while waiting for the ambulance and medical attention. She's buried in Philadelphia, where she'd settled some years prior. Thousands of mourners came to her burial. But her grave remained unmarked until 1970, when a tombstone was finally erected. It was financed by a woman named Juanita Green, who'd cleaned for the family in their Philadelphia home, and by the singer Janis Joplin. Both of these women were deeply moved and influenced by this treasure of a person. And that's just a tiny bit of information about the legendary Bessie Smith. But we would really like to play another tune of hers. It's called He's Got Me Goin'. It was recorded later in her recording career in the year 1929, and it was written by Porter Granger under the pseudonym of Harold Gray and recorded with James P. Johnson on piano.
Like that?
Yeah.
Don't know what's come over me, lost my self-control. He's the sugar in my tea, the jelly in my roll. Got me going, he got me going, but I don't know where I'm headed for. Gee, I got a loving man, one of those handsome brutes. He's built according to that plan, too bad when it suits. Got me going, but I don't know where I'm headed for. Sleep a doggone wink unless he's by my side. Mine's so different I just can't think without my easy ride. Got me going, but I don't know where I'm headed for. Lay and listen to the clock, kicks loud as a drum. Hear the crowing of our cock, still my man ain't come. Got me going, but I don't know where I'm headed for. Just one man's enough. I don't need no two men, 'cause my one man knows his style. Got me going, but I don't know where I'm headed for. Got a heart for just one man, knows how to get to it. For he's got the only key that's a perfect fit. Got me going, but I don't know where I'm headed for. Afraid to advertise my man, simply scared to death. These gals will hear about him and try him for themselves. Got me going, he's got me going, but I don't know just where I'm headed for.
All right, now Shaye and I are gonna give a little info on the two songs we played. So the Bleeding Hearted Blues, it was written by Cora Lovey Austin. She was a band leader, a piano player, a composer, and a singer. She was born also in Chattanooga, Tennessee, but a few years earlier than Bessie in 1887. She wrote other tunes Bessie performed, including Downhearted Blues and Any Woman's Blues. She died in 1972 in Chicago. And the accompanist here is Fletcher Henderson, who you'll hear a lot playing alongside the blues women in the recordings of the 1920s. However, he's most well known for his own big jazz and swing bands and his wonderful arrangements.
Fletcher Henderson was born in 1897 in Cuthbert, Georgia. He was an American pianist, band leader, arranger, and composer. He's considered one of the most influential band leaders and arrangers in jazz history. He was known for finding incredibly talented musicians and bringing them into his bands, such as Coleman Hawkins, Benny Carter, and Roy Eldridge. He began studying the piano at the age of 6. He was occasionally locked in his room to practice for hours, and by the age of 13, he was an accomplished pianist, but he decided to pursue mathematics and science as a young adult. He got a bachelor's degree in chemistry and moved to New York City with the intentions of furthering his studies there. He started to fill in for a pianist with a riverboat band and was eventually offered a full-time gig there. And he soon realized that music was going to offer him more opportunities than chemistry, so he pursued music full-time. He moved to Black Swan and worked as a session musician with vocalists like Ethel Waters. As Sarah said before, Bessie Smith did audition for Black Swan, but was turned away because they considered her style too rough and too boisterous, a euphemism for too black. For Black Swan, blues was acceptable only to the point that it did not threaten middle-class respectability, which they felt her singing did. But of course, Bessie and Fletcher would go on to record countless sessions together for other labels. In the mid-1920s, Fletcher Henderson began working with arranger and saxophone player Don Redman, and also hired Louis Armstrong to play lead trumpet in his band. During this time, his orchestra began to define the sound of big band jazz and swing music, and he died in 1952 in New York City.
So the Bleeding Hearted Blues was recorded later that same year in 1923 by James P. Johnson, who happens to be the accompanist on our next Bessie Smith selection, He's Got Me Going. This song was written by Porter Granger under the pseudonym of Harold Gray. Porter Granger was born in 1891 in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and Granger was a band leader, a pianist, and accompanist, and he wrote several popular tunes of the era, some other tunes that we're going to play today. He likely wrote under the pseudonym to evade contract stipulations and continue to get paid for his work. He died in 1955 in New York City. And then the great James P. Johnson is playing with Bessie on this tune.
And James P. Johnson was born in 1894 in New Brunswick, New Jersey. He's known famously as the father of the stride piano. Stride piano is a jazz piano style in which the right hand plays the melody and the left hand alternates between bass note and chord. James P. Johnson cited African-American songs and dances heard at home and around the city as early influences on his musical taste. He also grew up listening to Scott Joplin, and ragtime remained in his style throughout his lifetime. He was one of the key figures in the evolution of ragtime to what was eventually called jazz, and he was a large influence on the great pianists Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Art Tatum, and Fats Waller, who studied with him early on. His hit compositions included Carolina Shout, Old Fashioned Love, and the Charleston, the signature tune of the Roaring 1920s, the Roaring 20s. James P. Johnson was a sensitive accompanist and was reportedly one of Bessie Smith's favorite pianists to work with. They recorded several sessions together, including the famous Backwater Blues. Many of the songs they recorded were a departure from classic blues tunes, which were decreasing in popularity towards the later 1920s. The song forms were more complex than the 12-bar blues form, and James P. Johnson's playing was busier and more technical than that of Bessie Smith's other accompanists. To me, it sounds like the two really inspired each other, and together they brought a fresh energy to their performances. He died in 1955 in Jamaica, Queens.
And now we're going to turn from Bessie to Clara Smith. And we're going to start by playing a tune of hers. She recorded 122 recordings for Columbia in the 1920s. And this one's called The Deep Blue Sea Blues. It was written by Maggie Jones, composed by Clarence Williams, and recorded in 1924, again with Fletcher Henderson on piano. And this time we have an accompanist named Coleman Hawkins on tenor saxophone. The Deep Blue Sea Blues.
sand that is always on my mind. I'll take a tip from me. You know how I feel with my man at sea. I got the blues for the deep blue sea. Nothing but a tear can satisfy me. No automobile can change my mind. I feel like I've been an aeroplane and fly. When I hear that whistle blow, I know the ship is near the shore. Ain't but one man in this world that can satisfy me. That's the man that keeps rocking on the deep blue sea. I mean the deep blue sea. When I hear that whistle blow, I know the ship is near the shore. Ain't but one man in this world that can satisfy me. That's the man that keeps rocking on the deep blue sea. I mean the deep blue sea.
All right, so we got Clara Smith on this number. Clara Smith was born in 1892 or 1894 in Spartanburg, South Carolina. In 1910, she began working the theater circuits and vaudeville acts and such. And by 1918, she was headlining shows at the Lyric Theater here in New Orleans and on the TOBA circuit. She got up to New York by 1923 and was playing and recording and stayed for about a decade doing so. She signed with Columbia Records in 1923, just like Bessie did, and recorded well over 100 sides for them, second only in sheer amount to Bessie Smith. She was a very popular performer. She traveled and toured the usual North and Southeast and some Midwest, but she is one of the few of her cohort to tour and play on the West Coast, which she did in 1924-25. She recorded 4 duets with Bessie Smith and 4 with renowned guitarist Lonnie Johnson. These selections show her versatility as a performer and singer, as well as highlight her popularity, though she's lesser known to us now. She had her own club in 1924 in Harlem called the Clara Smith Theatrical Club, and her last recording was in 1932. The next year, she moved to Detroit, Michigan in 1933, where she continued to perform until just 2 years later when she died of heart disease in 1935 at the age of 41 or thereabouts. She was named Queen of the Moaners, and she really exhibits this type of sorrowful moan, suffering blues in her early recordings and song repertoire. There is an evolution of her style, of course, over the decade or so that she recorded. Her personal life was perhaps less wild and raucous as the legends of tales of Bessie's. It's said that the two were friends until Bessie was drunk and tried to fight her one time. She was married in 1926 to a man named Charles Wesley, who was a baseball manager. She was known to have had relationships with both men and women, including the legendary Josephine Baker. She was a mentor to Josephine and quite a bit older, but the two were lovers despite this age gap and experience gap. There was a culture of queerness well known among the performers of the 1920s show business. It's reflected in song subject matter with terms like lady lovers to describe bisexual women like Clara Smith, and the term bull dykers to describe lesbians. And although there's much less known about Clara than Bessie, and still far less known about other blues singers of the era, there is a lot we can feel about them through their songs and their recordings, and so many similarities among them in their stories coming up out of the ends of slavery and Reconstruction and through the Great Migration northward. Though we cannot assume, and the music itself can't tell us everything, it does give us insight and connects us to the deeper threads that run through the lives of these powerful voices. Next, we're going to play another Clara Smith tune. It's called It's All Coming Home to You. This one was also written by Porter Granger. It was recorded later in her career in 1928 with unknown accompaniment.
My soul's on fire today. My man has gone away. He left me nearly dead, lying in my bed, with chills and fever running through my head. Feel so bad, I'll just as soon be dead. But just as sure as 3 and 1 are 4, he's bound to reap just what he sowed. You can treat me like a dog, as greedy as a hog, but it's all coming home to you. You can lie and you can steal, you can rob and you can kill, but it's all coming home to you. Well, you may be like an eagle, oh, way up in the sky, but you got to come to earth, my friend. Don't care how high you fly, it may only be a day, it may take a year or two, but it's all coming home to you. You may leave me when I'm down, treat me rough and dog me around, but it's all coming home to you. You may break my heart in two, doing dirty things you do, but it's all coming home to you. You may go for months and Sundays, living hard without a hitch, then you wake and find yourself digging dirt from a ditch. You would want to come to me when you as blue as you can be, but it's all coming home to you. Hear me say, it's all coming home to you. I feel sorry, but it's bound to come home to you.
So for our Clara Smith selections, you'll see some repetition in the musicianship. The Deep Blue Sea Blues was split with a song called Texas Moaner Blues, which harkens back to her nickname as Queen of the Moaners. Deep Blue Sea Blues was written by Maggie Jones, also known as Faye Barnes, who was a singer and a pianist born in Hillsboro, Texas in 1894. She was named the Texas Nightingale. She toured the TOBA circuit and recorded for Black Swan, Victor, and mostly Columbia within the years 1923 and 26. After which she returned to Texas and performed at the All-American Cafe. But then she disappeared and her death date is unknown. Her most famous recording is The Good Time Flat Blues with Fletcher Henderson on piano and Louis Armstrong on cornet. And then this song is credited as having been composed by the prolific Clarence Williams.
Here's a very short introduction to Clarence Williams, one of my favorite composers. He was born in 1898 in Plaquemine, Louisiana. He ran away from home at the age of 12 to join a traveling minstrel show and eventually moved to New Orleans. He began a publishing business and then moved to New York City to continue his business there. He recorded extensively, owned many songs that others wrote, and wrote many himself. He was a wonderful pianist and band leader and was prolific in his music business. He recorded a lot with his wife, Eva Taylor, a vocalist, and he died in 1965 in Queens, New York City. So many of these great musicians ended up in New York in the 50s and 60s. I like picturing all the paths that may have crossed during that time, specifically in Queens. Interestingly, Sarah's mother and my father were raised in Queens around that time as well. Recently, my father sent me a photo that I wanted to share. It's taken in the bar in the basement of my grandparents' apartment in Queens, New York. Behind the bar is my grandfather, tenor sax player and arranger Al Cohn, with his daughter, my Aunt Lisa. Next to him is the great bassist Milt Hinton. On the left is my grandmother, vocalist Marilyn Moore, and tenor sax player Bud Johnson. Apparently, a lot of great jam sessions took place in that basement.
And on that tune, on the Deep Blue Sea Blues, we have Fletcher Henderson again on piano, who's also there in New York during those days. And we have a saxophone accompanist for the first time in the selections that we chose. And it's none other than Coleman Hawkins. Coleman Hawkins was born in 1904 in St. Joseph, Missouri. He was widely influential and greatly respected by his fellow musicians and continues to be so today. He played within about 5 decades of jazz, but he started his first major gig with Mamie Smith's Jazz Hounds in 1921 at the age of 17. He worked and lived in Europe and New York, and he died in New York in 1969. And for our second selection of Clara Smith's It's All Coming Home to You, there's no records of who's on piano or saxophone. It was recorded as a split with a song called Jelly, Look What You Done in 1928, and it was again written by our good friend Porter Granger. We'd like to finish this presentation with one of the treasured duets the two blues queens recorded together. It's really special to have these duets, and we both really love them a lot. And we chose to do a song called The Faraway Blues. It's exciting to have these collaborations to listen to, and this one is accompanied by our main squeeze, Fletcher Henderson, who also wrote the tune. He wrote it under the pseudonym of George Brooks. Again, it's called Faraway Blues. It was recorded in October of 1923. And on the other side is another duet called I'm Going Back to My Used to Be. The pair would go back into the studio to duet again in 1925 with the song Down Old Georgia Way, and on the other side, My Man Blues, which is a comedic interplay between the two. Faraway Blues, again, is a favorite of mine. The camaraderie between the two singers and the variance in their vocal inflections are some of the reasons I love it. It's a haunting song, and it really evokes the experience that so many of these women blues singers and black performers of the early 20th century lived. And we would like to thank you again, as well as thank Brett Gardner, who's behind the scenes here recording this project. So without further ado, here's the Faraway Blues.